About 2 weeks ago, Duval-Lantoine tabled her report on military attitudes towards sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. You may remember Therrien is the external monitor appointed by the government to make sure sexual misconduct is being addressed by the forces. In particular, that the 48 recommendations made by former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour are being implemented within the force. Well, with some reaction to this first biannual status report, we're now joined by Charlotte Duval-Lantoine. She is a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, also the author of The Ones We Let Down, Toxic Leadership Culture and Gender Integration in the Canadian Armed Forces. Charlotte, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, Michael.
Now, Madame Therrien, she did table this report a couple of weeks ago, and having had time to look at it, I'm wondering what stands out for you as a high point in addressing sexual misconduct and misogyny in the armed forces?
What I was very pleasantly surprised in what the external monitor reported in her latest report was the fact that the military is doing a lot right now, especially structurally, to help with the changes that Madame Arbour had recommended last year. We're seeing a lot of movement, especially at the recruiting school, with instructors being vetted properly and staffed completely. And also the fact that the military is putting in place professional conduct and culture officers within each command. That is very encouraging. And we see that things are moving forward, which we hadn't heard about much before that report came out.
Mm-hmm. So some highlights, as you say, but let's talk about low points then, because obviously the work is not yet done.
Absolutely. I mean, we know the military tends to move slowly, and the work is enormous on their end. One of the things that stands out to me is the fact that she's worried about the lack of a strategic plan, and the fact that aside from what her office is doing, there is no formal processes for monitoring and overseeing if the changes have an intended effect. But also on top of that, I find the report quite vague. I mean, it's also to the fact that it's quite short. But the thing is that we see progress, but we don't really know what the details are therein. And because of that, we do not know how it will look on the ground just yet. There are those activities. We know what they are high level, but we do not know how they operate within the institution just yet. And for that, I would be optimistic because we're seeing activities, but I would put a little asterisk to this by saying that for now, we do not know how this would go when confronted with the Canadian Armed Forces culture today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as you say, some unanswered questions still. But, let's get back to this strategic plan, this overall strategic plan, because as you say, Madame Therrien says none exists. Why is that? Why is that piece missing?
I think it's because of the way that the military operates. We've seen that with Operation Honor in 2015, and when we were promised a strategic plan, and then it came out in 2020. So we're seeing the military having difficulties committing to a strategic plan, especially when it comes to sexual misconduct. So this is an issue, and I know internally they're working on that, but the problem is that the process is a little bit too long. They're trying to get everything perfect instead of getting objectives down and understand that they need short, mid, and long-term objectives. So they're not there yet. They're working on that. But I would like to underline why it is important to have a plan is so that not only we know that the military is right on track and that the activities that we're saying today are not just a flurry of activities as Madame Arbour described in her report last year, but it's also to make sure that we can measure progress effectively and make sure that we can fine-tune policies and structures in place so that they can have the intended effect. Mm-hmm. If we don't have that when we start putting everything in place, we find ourselves in a difficulty to really understand whether each intervention has the intended effect or whether or not there has been a change of culture because of something else, and whether or not the policies that have been in place and the structures that have been put in place are useful for the service members that want to help the military move forward on culture change.
Yeah, moving forward on culture change, as you say. But right now, you're well aware of this. The forces are struggling with the recruitment. In fact, in some cases, they're even asking people to delay retirement and/or reconsider leaving the forces because they're so short-staffed. How much of this do you think is tied to the kind of treatment women and racialized recruits receive in the forces?
So the thing is that we do not have huge data on this, but anecdotally, I've met a couple of people that have left the military over the sexual misconduct scandals and are preempted of not joining the military because they're scared of how they're going to be treated. So anecdotally, I've had those conversations with people. We're looking into getting that data, but honestly, if you feel like you're not going to be welcome in an institution, you're less likely to join it. Some people do not prioritize this as much as other people, but we cannot overlook that fact. And we see that also among air cadets, the young folks that are involved in the military in a way that do not want to join the regular forces or the reserve forces for that reason. Then there's a lot of other factors, obviously, but when you look at factors, it's usually accumulation of things, and we cannot deny the fact that that might have an impact because people care about how they're going to be treated within an organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, that all said, as we said, this was only the first report from the external monitor. More will come. What will you be looking for in terms of next steps?
So she's been very clear about what she's looking for her next report, and I'm very interested in seeing that second report, actually, because it's very much focused on whether or not the policies are having the intended effect and moving a little bit the conversation outside of the national headquarters of defense to the people in the field, the people who are experiencing culture in bigger ways than the people who are making the policies. So I do think that right now the report brings quite a cautious optimism in me, but I think that the October report is going to be way more hard-hitting, and I'm going to be reading it very closely when it comes out in 6 months.
Well, without doubt, we'll speak again at that point. But Charlotte Duval-Lantoine, for now, thank you for the time. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.